talk about you being a part of the pilgrimage to Minidoka, your family's connection there, how you got involved in all of this.
Sure. So I'm a double descendant of the place. Both sides of my family were incarcerated there. I had kind of a farming side of the family who were really poor tenant farmers in the White River Valley. And then I had some folks that were already living in the city, in the redlined part of the central district and doing their business in Nihonmachi, Japantown, now the Chinatown International District. So they were all rounded up and first sent to Puyallup and then to Minidoka in the high desert of southern Idaho. And I feel lucky that my two grandmothers were willing to talk to me when I was, doing an eighth grade Washington State history paper. And kind of, I saw the piece about the incarceration in our little textbook, and it was just a paragraph or two. And my mother encouraged me to ask them and see if they'd be willing to talk. And they did. And I think I only, in my adult years, really realized how valuable and special that was. And they didn't say anything emotional. It was very factual, but it still laid a framework for me. And I think that was just the point that started me on my journey,
Right. Now you have a career as an artist, and then you went away to the East Coast, and then you came back to Seattle, and you've actually taken your artwork and focused it on a lot of these issues of the incarceration. So talk about that a bit and why that's important.
I just care about the community so much, and there's been so much understandable silence around the history that I wanted to try to help bring the stories to light, and I was doing it for myself and for my family. I went on my first pilgrimage with my parents. My dad was born there and he had never been back. His parents didn't go back to that land. My mom's parents were matched and married in the camp. And then they were able to leave and go into the Midwest to work, where my mom was born in Cleveland. So I wanted to do something to honor my immediate family. And then it was sort of about honoring the larger community, and kind of thanking them for having me, like welcoming me back. Actually, I was gone for a while. I was gone for 30 years almost.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah. And
so to give people a kind of a sense of the camps, or the detention centers or the incarceration centers or whatever you want to call them is appropriate. How many were there, and how many have become monuments or historical sites?
So there are 10 main camps that civilians went to, but then there were like 75 total places where people were imprisoned as a result of this lockdown. And a couple of my colleagues are really trying to more carefully archive those, because it's, they were all over the country and all manners of places. That's a good question. I don't know how many are actually monuments. I'm going to say at least 5 of them. But I will say, Minidoka has a distinction of being one of those places. And it was because President Clinton made it a national historic site that our pilgrimage sort of began running more officially, because I think people could now, go to the site with the idea that we're having a little, a little bit of a reunion and an ability to heal, along with, just the inevitable kind of shame and pain that come along with revisiting those stories. So it legitimized us, I guess, to make it a national historic site.
When did the pilgrimages begin?
So ours in 2003, and Manzanar began running theirs much earlier.
And when did you get involved with those pilgrimages?
I guess that first one I went on with my folks, which was probably 2014. And then I came back in 2015, and it's been go, go, go.
So how was it for you when you went on that first pilgrimage, and how was it for your parents when they went?
Yeah, I remember we were just all very nervous. I thought that I was going to have like a lot of rage come up, like stuff that I had been carrying and questions. And I did have some of that come up. But it's interesting, like you guys know our community, we can be very intense, but there also is a lightness. I think we strive for that balance. And I don't know who sort of decided that about our pilgrimage, but we do really try to balance things out and have fun, and create an environment that's not simply focused on the hardship, because we made it, or most of us did.
Survived, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what took place there is unquestionably one of the kind of most traumatic events in Asian American history. I mean, it's a black mark on this country. Yet, not that many people understand it. I mean, they know that it kind of happened. I think most people are aware that it happened, but they didn't know the depth of it and the brutality of it. And so, why is this place so important to Japanese Americans? And why should it be important to people that aren't Japanese Americans?
I think we know, I know as a fourth generation Japanese American person what my forebears gave up. I have a very deep understanding of what it took for me to be here. A kid who got to go from public school in Seattle to private school on the East Coast, these sort of stepping stones to different opportunities. And I think now that we're a little bit away from it too, my generation has helped really start a conversation about how the United States actions and behaviors around the incarceration are just echoing and repeating. And it wasn't the first time, that land was taken away from people, that imprisoning brown bodies is used as a way to control economic success. Because a lot of the racism, right, pointed at Asian people is as soon as we start to show a little bit of economic vitality, getting a foothold in the country. And this is when those barbs really, really land, from the supremacist groups, I have found, by record of newspapers and laws.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that in the Chinatown International District, Japantown is there. People know it's there, but they don't know the extent of it, because when the incarceration happened, Japanese Americans were the majority population in that area. I mean, I can't remember. Maybe you can help me remember. How large was Japantown at that time, just prior to World War II?
Yeah, sorry, you keep asking me all these hard questions.
Well, no, but I know it went from Pioneer Square, but it went
Yeah.
all the way to 23rd and
Yeah. So it was, several miles, something like 200 different hotels were run by Japanese American families. I mean, that was just the hotels, you know?
And I think the Japanese outnumbered the Chinese almost 7-1 at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine overnight almost, right? When everyone was incarcerated, what it did to that neighborhood. Yet there's nothing there in that neighborhood that kind of speaks to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that why the sites like Minidoka are so sacred? I mean, and that they mean so much, because that is the manifestation of what happened.
I do think that, I think, of course, there's this direct correlation, right, to being able to have these places that represent us. Like, we don't want necessarily a desert prison camp site to represent who we are, but it does represent this huge chapter, and something that we really think all Americans should learn from. Like, we need to heal from it still, and other people need to learn the lessons of it so that we can kind of try to cut off these repeating patterns of behavior. Family separation that's going on right now, with our migrant sisters and brothers, that is totally what the US government did to the Japanese American on day one, right? They took the men and the leaders away. It's so textbook.
Yeah. But it raises fear of people, also taking away rights, because you were talking about people that were American citizens. And it raises this whole issue of if it could happen to anybody, really. And yet we're living that today.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that the dominant culture in America can easily forget, the genocide that happened under their watch, the incarceration of Japanese Americans. Yet they can't forget the Civil War, right? I mean, they want us to move on. So one of the things the reason we want you on the show is because there's yet another existential threat to the historic site, Minidoka. Can you talk a little bit about that? Explain what is actually going on there and why it's so devastating.
The lands that, were the original camp, about 33,000 acres. A lot of it is owned by the Bureau of Land Management. So that's part of the federal government, Department of Interior.
So the Minidoka sat on 33,000 acres? Or
yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
33,000 acres.
So relatively, how big is that? Is that like Mercer Island?
That's a good question. It became the third largest city in Idaho overnight.
Oh, really?
Wow. Really? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of interesting things happened to that land when, after we were there.
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Bureau of Land Management has the option of, leasing the land. They're supposed to care for the land. But in this case, they hadn't really updated their management plan of the land since the 80s. And so this large power company out of New York, LS Power, kind of snuck in through a loophole and started to make a bid to build a very large wind farm. We're talking about 740 feet tall windmills.
So how tall is that? Relative, like speaking to the Space Needle, the Smith Tower.
Taller than the Space Needle, taller than the Smith Tower.
And that's one turbine.
One single turbine with the blades as wide as the wingspan of a 747.
Wow.
And then in the largest scenario, about 400 of those wind turbines. So they would be set up in rows, and there would be, all the necessary lines to power them, etc.
And how big an area would that be spread over? Like the 33,000 acres or more?
I I'm not sure about the acreage of where it would sit. You would be able to see it from 2/3 of the site. Like if you're thinking about a circular view of the current National Historic Site. So
It would be hard to miss these, because
it would be very hard to miss
anybody
them.
that has driven from Seattle to central eastern Washington, as you go over Snoqualmie Pass, and like if you're going to go to Spokane off of I-90, and then you see the hillsides there, not far from Ellensburg. As you go from Ellensburg to Vantage, they are right there. And
Yeah.
if you've ever driven through that area and you're able to pull off, you can hear the noise that they make, and it's noisy. It's very noisy. And I mean, they're huge. They're just huge.
Well, but
Yeah.
what's interesting is the site that they're talking about in Minidoka. I mean, I've seen the maps, and the footprint is larger than the entire city of Seattle. I don't think people get the scope of it, because even the ones we're talking about in Eastern Washington aren't nearly that big.
Right. Larger than the footprint of Seattle.
Wow.
It's incredible. And yes, would it generate a lot of power? Yes, it would. Is President Biden asking us to create, a certain amount of green energy by 2025? Yes, he is. But, out of the other side of his mouth, already he's issued, I think, 3 different executive orders that talk about protecting and enhancing the rights of people of color, and specifically ANHPI people. One of them specifically in regard to environmental justice. So I would just really like for him to figure out how to do both things.
So how would it disrupt the historic side of Minidoka? Other than visually, you would see it.
I just think it's so important for people to really understand that it was a prison camp, and the US government deliberately cited these camps in desolate places where no one wanted to be, on these crap desert lands that at the time were not farmed and were really not habitable. If I said that right.
Yeah. You couldn't inhabit them well.
Thanks, Enrique.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and every survivor, every person who's been interviewed about this experience, like, if they can talk about it at all, that's what they talk about, right? Like the bodily conditions, the deeply bitter winters, and the wind that whips through there, and the fact that the sand got everywhere into the cracks of the shittily built barracks that were covered with tar paper, and those were the things that people had to deal with, these muddy roads that ran through them, and just, the very, very minimal human trapping of the place.
It was a prison, basically.
It was a prison camp.
It was a concentration camp.
Yeah.
It was a concentration camp.
Because there was barbed wire around it. You had,
Yeah.
Gun towers, the whole bit.
Yeah.
I mean, to give people an idea how hostile the environment was, the fact they want to put a mega wind farm there speaks to the constant wind that ripped through that area.
Yeah.
Yes.
And people were forced to live there.
Yes, it's a good point.
So how are people reconciling this? The fact is that they don't give a shit of what happened there, that they're going to say, green energy, aces everything out because we need green energy. But at what cost? At the cost of forgetting something they don't want to remember? Right. Or, I mean, what is that argument? I mean, why are they not listening to that?
Without saying at the cost of you people, as well as the other players in the game. There's a ton of partners in Idaho that are ranchers and farmers and environmentalists and naturalists and hunters. I mean, there's a lot.
Well, there's
of
indigenous people too, right? There's a number of tribes.
Yes,
that
and
are opposed to the Lava Ridge project, right?
right. That is secret ground for them, above us, all throughout that region. So, the government and of course the company are not speaking of it in that way. And we'll see what happens. We're right at the end of the public comment period for the Bureau of Land Management's document, the draft environmental impact statement. And, we will now have to wait for them to go through all of those and issue the final statement, and then sort of a final decision. And then a number of things can happen after that. It's far from over.
What's the timeline? What are we talking about?
They're saying that a final decision will come by fall, so that we'll see a final document, they say, by the end of summer.
Is there any way to, I guess, find some way to compromise on all of this? Or
Perhaps.
is it?
But we're not, I think we're just not there yet. I think it's an interesting question. I've talked to Matt about it too. And should we have a price? I don't know. Maybe. But we're not there yet.
And it's interesting because everybody has sacred places that they hold for whatever reason. I mean, and the myriad of reasons in Minidoka are there. I mean, people died there, people were born there, people were married there. I mean, a lot of human activity that is core to being human happened there. And to just gloss over it because it was forced upon them. I think people sometimes need moments of reflection in places like that to kind of absorb that, because there is an energy there.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, the windmills, the wind farms just kind of intrudes on that.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be like, okay, well, here's a cemetery. Let's put some wind turbines right in the middle of the cemetery. And people would object to that, right, because there is a sanctity there that people need to hold. And I think that's what we're talking about in Minidoka.
Yeah.
Right.
Erin, what do you say to those people who might say to you about this? Well, that was then and this is now.
I would say, folks, this is now, and this is now, and this is now. It's a real repeating cycle of actions. And I just happen to be a person who's really, I just want to use my moral imperative that's related to this very personal history to point that out, and to point out how many connections there are between stories of communities of color in this country. And the things that we've had to put up with. I mean, I was just thinking about how connected, our hood is, the Chinatown International District, how we're always trying to fight for that land that we were forced into, right? We were forced to live in a certain part of the city. We were redlined in.
That no one wanted to live in.
And now look at us. We're like fighting tooth and nail to protect our residents and to protect the places that we built. So to me, it feels like part of that same puzzle and fight.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy for dominant culture to say, oh, that's the past. We need to move forward, because they have nothing to lose there, because they have the privilege of doing that.
Yeah.
And I think any culture has a right to exist. And when they say, look, that was the past, you have to honor that past. You have to always honor that past, because that's the only thing that would even begin to mitigate the harm that was done. And I think people need to understand that.
And in this country, it seems like we keep bringing back the past or reliving the past in the present in bad ways, and that we're harming our citizens. We're harming our democracy. And, again, it's just that we're repeating these mistakes, or we tend to repeat these mistakes. I want to just note the fact that, you're actually, your offices that you have as an artist are back in the Japantown area, right?
Yeah, I do. I have a little studio in the Jackson building there on 6th and Jackson. And
actually, in the alleyway right by there is work that you've done. Talk a bit about that a little bit.
Yeah, when I first started to do public art, when I moved back here, I just dipped into kind of the rich collection of historic photos of the time period. Thank God there were photos, that a lot of people documented what happened, and documented it well. So I have a mural that has images of Minidoka and of people being taken from Bainbridge Island, and of soldiers. There are all these Japanese American guys who volunteered from the camps. Minidoka sometimes is referred to as the good camp, because so many the most guys and gals volunteered. And then, I've been able to help other neighborhood individuals and organizations do a bit more placekeeping in that alley. So we've put down some ground plane murals and some other wayfinding and historic information and some lighting.
And this is Maynard Alley in the CID, right? Yeah. Between Jackson and Maine.
Nihonmachi Alley, actually. Yeah, I think we're trying to get it officially named too. Okay.
And I think it's important to mention that you were part of a controversy at Bellevue College.
Yes, I love to talk about that controversy. Matt always brings it up.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean,
because
people should know
classic.
It's classic.
Classic.
Yeah, you're right.
It is.
It fits right into this conversation.
It does. There we go again.
Yes, I know.
Links.
Yeah, because it was an art installation that you put into Bellevue, and the overlords in Bellevue that were largely responsible. They promoted the incarceration and benefited financially from the vacating of all the properties to build Bellevue Square and all this stuff. And they didn't like the wording of your installation. And so what do? They just whited it out.
Yeah, and tell us what was the installation and the wording and all of that. And how far back was this? This was just a few years ago, right?
Right before COVID, right before it descended upon us. We were out there. Everyone was kind of nervously out there. I have a printout of the mural because I was going to stick it somewhere. Here's a little one.
Right.
I used this Dorothea Lange image of these two
Never
children.
Again Is Now. Yes.
And those words I used as well. And I successfully got a huge, I think it's a 11-foot version of that image up on the wall of Bellevue College. And after the first couple pieces I put up, I was like, oh, I need to have interpretation on everything. I'm an amateur historian, and people just don't know what this is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe the community knows what it is, but everyone else doesn't. So I wrote my interpretive panel, and I will tell you guys, that panel, a lot of people don't know this. There's only one written piece of media about it. That same text was also censored at an earlier Bellevue event, the Bellwether Festival. And I had a different piece about the Bellevue Japanese American community. And they also did not want me to say Mr. Freeman's name
It was Kemper
related.
Freeman, who is the developer in Bellevue, who
Mhm.
has been a big developer there and has
Mhm.
benefited from the developments.
I
And
mean,
during the time of the
yeah,
war, also his
yeah.
family got the land.
His grandfather was actually a really out in the open, vocal anti-Asian agitator. He published these views in his newspapers, and he encouraged people to support the incarceration. He did
Yeah, he
all
was a racist.
He was a racist dude. And then there was a land grab, and guess who ended up with all of it?
Mhm.
So yeah, so back to the campus of Bellevue College, you know, I feel bad for my friends who are the professors, the Asian American professors who invited me to put the mural up. They were like, okay, yeah, all right, let's put this interpretation up. They kind of, they knew it was a little dicey. And then it was just a few days later, a very high level administrator. She was a vice president. I think she was in development. Just whited out those lines
Thinking no one
about
would
Freeman.
notice.
And where was that interpretive panel at? Because I know that the picture was up on the building, inside of the building, but was that down below?
Yeah, down
Yeah,
below, just at eye level. Yeah,
right. Yeah, where people could see it and it would
Is
have.
the installation still there?
it is.
Yeah, so
It's
people could go see it.
Yeah, it's still there. I think it just happened to be kind of a wall that doesn't get very much weather,
Yeah.
or the ancestors are keeping it up. I thought that some person on campus was like surreptitiously continuing to apply wheat paste to it because it's in pretty good shape.
Mm.
But they swear that no one is doing such a thing.
So that ended up actually uh, people lost their jobs. The people at the high level in the president was impacted by at the time was impacted by this, and that is why Gary Locke eventually became president of Bellevue College in the aftermath of all of that.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, what's rich is that the school is majority Asian, right?
Yes, it
It's
is
just,
rich.
it's just
Oh,
nuts.
that is very nuts.
Well, let's get back to Lava Ridge and Minidoka. One of the things, before we leave this conversation is personally, how would you be impacted? Let's say you're there at the monument, and what is it that is spiritually empowering to you as it exists now? And what would the harm be? What would if they actually successfully put in the wind turbines? What would be the difference for you?
Well, I just think that we're just going to have this incredibly visible and audible symbol of America's corporate greed right in our faces as we try to commune with our ancestors there, as we try to bring our last few survivors there to make peace with what happened, and as we try to also engage, our youth and other people who aren't necessarily immediately related to our community in this history in a deep and personal way. You know, museums are built up in ways where you have a certain designed experience, right? The lighting and the exhibit and sound installations, and that's what these monument parks do too, and so part of that experience is just understanding the vast open space and the sounds that our people heard during that experience.
So for you, what was it like when you're standing there, realizing what went on in the lineage, your family's lineage there? What
It's
is the feeling?
it's really powerful, and again, it's that really complex mixture of sorrow and gratitude and drive. I have to say it drives me. Like, I am a person who does almost exclusively work about this story, in 2023. Why would that be? Because I see the value of it today. I see the value of it, and I see how it's been erased from the American education system by design, by our government. This is not a coincidence. Books about this are still being banned. This Maggie Tokuda is dealing with it right now.
Yeah, can you say Florida? Can you say Texas? Can you say
exactly
people that are doing children's books? All of these types of things. And can you say Asian hate today? Let's face it.
Add that into the mix. This sort of unyielding passion for the forever foreigner trope,
Right. Are your parents still alive?
They are.
How do they feel about this?
Well, they're coming back with me again to pilgrimage, and have been very supportive, and I think they understand. So many things happened to their families there. When I'm on that land, I think about how my grandmother Shigaki had to walk all the way across camp pregnant to deliver my dad, who was delivered by a horse veterinarian, by the way. Again, it was a prison camp. And then I think about, my other grandma, Mitzi, how she saw my grandfather kind of peeking at her through the laundry lines, that were just hanging up between the barracks. Just these incredible stories relating to our existence happened on that land. And it's just too important for us to smear.
When's the next pilgrimage?
This July.
Yeah. Anybody can go on that?
Anyone can. The registration period closed. This year we decided to have a priority registration period for descendants and survivors of the full experience. And we filled right up. So I would love for you two to come sometime, though.
I would love to go. Yeah, definitely. We have a good friend that is Eugene Tagawa. We worked with him at King, and we've featured him on our podcast. He did so reluctantly, but we managed to threaten him enough to do it. But, so we know what that means for Eugene and for others. And I don't know. I just hope maybe we're able to find some way of making sure that Minidoka is never forgotten, and that its value as a sacred ground is never forgotten too.
I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people have gone on the pilgrimage and gone through the historic site. What is the one emotion you think that is universal for people that go there?
Wow, that's a big question. I really think the word would be reckoning. It's one of these places, I think, that helps people really understand in your body a very important piece of history.
Well, we can't forget. That's the main thing.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Erin, for sharing this with us, and we'll check back with you on how this proceeds, because it's such a complex issue. Involves green energy, becomes politics, and basically, you guys are fighting big energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate that both of you have advised us along the way in this journey. I appreciate the community that you provide, and I'm really grateful to be able to be on your pod.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Take care, and we'll see what happens. Good luck.
Thank you.